Everyone is talking about AI transformation, but few are talking about the teams who actually have to live it. My guest today, Dr. Michelle Caryn Paul, believes the most future ready organizations aren't the ones with the best tech. They're the ones where teams know how to reinvent themselves. She's an organizational effectiveness expert and a certified AI consultant who spent over 2 decades helping leaders turn experimentation into a habit. Today, we are unpacking how to make AI a real team member, not a shiny side project, and what it takes to redesign the way we work from the ground up. Michelle, welcome to Tides.
Thanks. So great to be here with you.
Likewise, Michelle, I'm really excited to unpack this conversation with you today. And I know you talk a lot about experimentation as the organizational skill of the future. I'm curious, how does that connect with the idea of redesigning teams? Is experimentation how teams actually learn how to reinvent themselves?
So, yes, partially. I really think we've been through several technological revolutions that have affected how our organizations need to evolve, how our roles evolve, and how our teams evolve. And so, before generative AI came on the scene in 2022, we had technology introduced into our organizations, but really almost 100% of the time, those pieces of technology came into our work environment with very established business processes attached to them. So we were told how to use the tools, and that was by design. The tools were procured and or developed internally, and they were hitched to established business processes that then we followed to execute our work. What's completely different about AI is that each of us as humans, as members of a team, and as members of our operating unit and our larger organization, are making micro decisions all day long about how to use these tools. There are not prescribed business processes in many cases. So it's very daunting for teams to grapple with how to how do we use AI? We might have very different opinions amongst our team members on how AI could help, where AI is suited to help, and where it is not suited to help. You and I are both proponents of responsible and ethical AI adoption. So that is clearly an undercurrent for all teams, no matter what level of sensitivity of data you're dealing with. It's always a concern about whether we are interacting with these tools in a way that is responsible, ethical, and effective. And so, the experimentation comes into play where, since we're making these choices all day long, we are in fact experimenting on an individual level. But what I believe is that the effective teams are then able to experiment in the team level. And, most of our organizations and teams, we don't really know how to experiment. That just hasn't been part of our organizational DNA because we are probably not, some of us are, but we're probably statistically not in the type of organization that creates a product that has prototyping and minimal viable product generation and experimentation built into how that organization has been operating for, in this case, decades. Many of our organizations, experimentation is just not something that has been part of our work before. So I believe we need to learn how to do that. And, we know that generative AI tools are essentially just prediction machines and context is everything. And so if we as a team are not playing around and experimenting with the type of context we're giving and the types of results we're getting and feeling free to speak up when there is a quote failure or bad behavior or bad output, if we're in an environment where that's kind of shunned or that is perceived, say if Michelle's using the AI tool and she gets a bad result, is she perceived as less competent than somebody who happens to get a good result? We need to be in an environment where that experimentation is open and where failure is accepted as part of us all learning and growing together to increase our impact as a team.
Love your framing of helping us understand the difference between how we have looked at past digital transformations versus what we are experiencing today. I always used to think of it as this time around, I don't think I'm working with a tool. It's like an intelligence. So, how do you work with an intelligence? But the way you frame it as, which is so powerful that in previous iterations of transformation, it was like a prefabricated home that we were building. We already had the layout and the design of that structure that we are going to build. But this time around, the end state of this change is not defined yet. So this is truly building the plane while we are flying it. And at the same time, not all organizations have the culture, or not all parts of the organizations might have had culture, experience, exposure to dealing with this level of uncertainty and ambiguity, and having that mindset of experimentation, because fear of not just failure, but also there's fear of losing jobs. But at the same time, I want to understand from your perspective, what is the cost to the teams if they don't engage with this experimentation, learning, and readaptation?
Well, so the speed of AI change is really daunting. It's so intense. Things like traditional strategic planning or traditional planning out the work over a long period of time and then setting the team loose to going and executing. In my humble opinion, those days are over, because if we don't use these more kind of iterative cycles of trying something out, talking about the results, being critical, and then continuously changing, we're losing opportunity that we could be harnessing to improve our work. And then also another risk is that if this experimentation is not part of how a team operates, then good use tends to kind of gravitate, almost like magnetize, towards those people that tend to use the tool effectively. And then the other folks who might have been more resistant, or for whatever reason just haven't really had the opportunity to experiment with the tool, then they're feeling a little left out. So it becomes this in-group, out-group dynamic within the team, which we all know from team effectiveness literature is a performance killer for sure. So that's another risk, is that that might lead to conflict within the team. It might lead to problems and raising good ideas and or building consensus where that's needed. And then also the other risk is really, we might perpetuate irresponsible use of AI,
Mhm.
because we are not having these open dialogues about where it's working well and where it might not be working so well. And if we're in a multifunctional team, we might have different domain experts involved. And so I need to talk to you with your particular domain expertise and have you chime in on whether this is considered effective use or responsible use, because my perspective is all framed by my own background and biases. I mean, we're all humans, so we're all bringing bias to this. But the point is, if we don't have these multiple perspectives, we don't have the dialogue, we're actually more likely to use the tools not only ineffectively, but we're more likely to perpetuate historical biases, which is something that I'm very passionate about,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm.
stopping. The last thing is that, leadership, whether it's a team lead or an operating unit lead or a C-suite member, leadership that doesn't model experimentation really risks losing credibility with staff at this particular time where we were all experiencing disruption, and also may risk losing staff's trust. And so if people don't feel the permission to experiment, we'll default to maintaining the old way, which really is impossible to do these days because the world is changing around us. We're full people. So we might be using these tools personally to help us develop a travel itinerary, right? And then we get to work and we have to magically not use a tool, or you only use it in these ways and not be able to talk about that. That just leads to really kind of discordant work experiences, which is not good for anyone's individual productivity as well. So those are some of the risks really that I see if these experimentation practices aren't adopted into just the way we do things around here as a team.
Absolutely. And I know you have a very guided experience to help organizations get on this journey of experimentation, especially the ones where the core DNA is not experimentation. And we also know that the behavior shift and creating that environment at work that's conducive to experimentation, sometimes if we follow the traditional path, might take much longer and we don't have that much time. So I'd love to get into your guided experience or the framework. But before we do that, I would really love for you to unpack for us the difference between modernization and transformation. What do we really mean when we talk about thinking about applying AI with the lens of modernization versus transformation?
So modernization and transformation, some thoughts about that. I really think that this is going to be might be seem kind of a strange way to enter this topic, but I love to share a story with folks. The reason that I became an organizational psychologist is because my father was a labor attorney and he represented unions like the AFL-CIO, the Teamsters, meat packers at grocery stores, things like that. So when I was growing up, my kitchen table discussion was about people having problems at work, having unfair work practices, having unsupportive work environments, people who had great track records at their jobs. One thing happened, they get fired on the spot, right? Things like that. And so my guiding questions have been for 25 years or more, how do we create work environments where people can thrive? Because I remember being 7, sitting at the kitchen table thinking, people spend 8, 10 hours a day at their work. Like, first of all, as a kid, that just felt really silly. But then I really started to think about it. And I thought, if somebody is in a toxic work environment, or if somebody is subject to unfair practices, then that's going to really affect their well-being as a human. That's going to spill over and create stress for their family. And how can we improve that as a society and, in a greater global community? And so I've always thought of modernization and transformation for me personally as being opportunities to upgrade our job experiences, to create more fulfilling job design for ourselves. If I ask you what you were hired to do, and then I ask you what you typically spend the most time on each day, those answers probably don't match. And so people really are feeling, again, this gap over time, and it might grow, it might get embedded in, the way that we are doing our work and rules and compliance and all these things. But if my particular reason of being in that role isn't being fostered and nurtured and given a space to thrive on my daily practices, then what's this all for anyway, right? So when we're talking about transformation and modernizing the work with technology, my angle on it is, well, let's look at how we can give to machines more of the icky stuff that we don't really want to be doing and that frankly we're not the best at either. Great example. You work for a food bank. You're doing intake appointments with citizens to try to figure out if they're eligible for services, what services they're eligible for. You're having 20-minute meetings with each citizen and you're asking the same 40 questions over and over again. Now, it's a great chance to make a connection with somebody in the community and provide support and probably have sidebar conversations. But in general, your job in that meeting is to ask the same 40 questions over and over again. When the whole time you're thinking, well, I would rather be working the mobile food pantry right now and going out to citizens' homes and delivering food rather than asking the same 40 questions over and over. So modernization and transformation, that example is using AI to conduct the intake interview and offer up eligibility recommendations to the human. The human always makes the final decision, but those humans are not spending all that time on repetitive routine tasks that have if then logic and like that those should be done by machines. That's perfect, right? Let's keep the stuff that we do well and let's give ourselves more time to do the things that fulfill us and the things that we're driven to do, which is the reason that we joined that role anyway in the beginning. So that's my perspective about how transformation should work and how modernization should work. And I personally I know there are a lot of opinions about AI, and rightly so, because it's scary, some of the things that are happening. But I also feel at the same time, we have an amazing opportunity in our hands right now to truly transform how we work, to help us do more of what matters to us personally and matters to our organizations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love your story. And I completely hear you that whether it's modernization, where we are improving what we are doing today with tools, or it's transformation, where we come up with completely new ways of getting the same outcome, the bottom line is that at the end of the day, the people, the human involved in that process, should feel like they are contributing value in a more meaningful way, which satisfies them versus humans operating like a machine because we didn't have a machine to do that job. So excellent. So, with that setup, guide us through your team framework, which helps us kind of get onto this journey of experimentation because there's no playbook for where we are going.
So it starts with the governance setup that an organization has. And I particularly am extremely vocal about how governance needs to happen a little bit differently now with AI, because our governance and our kind of how we're adopting AI as an organization, those choices should not, no offense to technologists and legal folks that are watching and listening, but those choices should not only be made by technologists, by the legal and privacy experts, or frankly, by the C-suite, right? So traditionally, governance is a function that's performed by very high level experienced staff members, leaders in an organization. And I believe that for AI, we must include multiple functions and we must include multiple levels. Phases of the career trajectory must be included in that and have a role. And I'm a huge proponent of having rotational roles within government entities, not something a lot of people do, but I do think it's well suited for AI. So that governance entity really, frankly, in my opinion, needs to transfer agency to intact operational teams to have this, to be able to experiment rather than having an edict come down from upon high and says, this is the way that we're adopting. Here's the way, here's red zone, green zone. Like those things are important to articulate in general, but actual uses, being kind of told down, top down. So what I offer and what I've developed with teams is frankly a structured exercise that's in 3 parts, and it's designed really, it is helpful for have an external facilitator start the team off and maybe run the team through the first round. Those 3 parts should repeat over time at some cadence that the team establishes. I recommend quarterly. In some organizations that's not feasible, but with the pace of change of AI, it seems to me that it would be fortuitous of us to make sure that we are re-examining these questions. So the 3-part exercise is in 20-minute segments, and it's designed to be inserted into a regularly recurring, routinely happening team meeting. This is not to be yet another activity that we're asking people to do on top of their very many cases already overburdened workload. It has an agenda slot in an existing team meeting. And part 1 is really looking at, how could our work change? Right. And the team is given guided questions to discuss and build a shared awareness about how AI is showing up in our daily work and maybe some early redesign opportunities that we can explore together. So teams review kind of a list of here's where it's good to use AI more, here's where it's good to use AI less as far as the type of tasks. So the suitability, that intake appointment example earlier would be a great example of a task. Oh, this is perfect to give to the machine. And so the team will look at their major tasks that take up the most time or that are the most vital to the organization and kind of classify them in, could we use AI more? Should we use AI less? And discuss some questions such as, what would progress look like for us if we start to experiment safely with AI on one process this month? Like, what would that look like? So we start getting that going and maybe pick something to, again, start experimenting with. So that's part 1. Part 2 is reconvening in the next team meeting for another 20 minutes and having the team explore how should we work together differently. So here's where we translate what we looked at in part one, and we focus on our shared norms, our collaboration and communication strategies that we use. And we ask, do those need to be adjusted? Because typically one thing that happens with AI, when you include AI as a team member, and I know we'll probably talk more about this later, but when you're including AI as a team member, the handoffs between AI and another human or between human and human become even more important to kind of orchestrate differently. So we want to check that each person's role is clear, that we're clear about handoffs, and we're, putting that structure into place because, we can't really like talk ourselves into working well together. We have to have structures to support that way of working, right? So that's part two. That's how, should we work together differently? And then fast forward to part three, your third team meeting, you have another 20-minute slot, and we look at what value can we create together. So here is where we think about as a team, how can we reinvest the freed up time into generating new sources of value as a team? It is quite common when I work with teams that many members have wish list items that they've wanted to get to in their role, or the team collectively has had ideas for how to offer new things, how to do things differently. But frankly, really, here's where I'm talking about new sources of value that team can offer. And we just haven't had time to explore those things. We haven't had the bandwidth to do that. So that's what the discussion in part three is, to identify what those new sources of value are and put together our return on investment for those ideas. And then really the outcome of all of these three parts together is another structure framework. Really, it's a kind of a template that teams can use to make a proactive proposal to leadership and say, we've explored this. This is what we recommend we do. Here's why. And here's our ROI calculation. And by the way, here are the new sources of value that we would like to propose that we do. And here's what the organization will benefit from us performing in that way. So the team goes through this progression, and then they provide this proposal or appeal to leadership to, and sometimes they might be asking for investment in a particular tool. They might be asking for support to be able to build a tool themselves. Or sometimes they might just be asking for endorsement to use existing tools in the company's IT infrastructure that they want to be clear about how they're performing. So that's a little bit of what I've seen being really effective. And I also just reiterate that the first time the team goes through this, it is useful to have an external facilitator, but it's not always necessary. It depends on the team itself. And then the idea is, over time, each member of the team on a rotational basis will have a chance to play facilitator for that team and run the team through this exercise like once a quarter or twice a year or whatever cadence the team establishes. Because it's not a one and done. We'll always need to have this structured dialogue that provides this grounding to include experimentation just in the way that we work.
So the way that beautifully explained, Michelle. So basically, in 3 steps or 3 touch points, a team can identify out of 10 things that they could have worked on. They've identified the top 1, 2, 3, however many, depending on the capacity of the organization, and have like a proposal or a business case ready to speak to the wider decision-making team to say, please give us your time, energy, and resources to solve for this particular business problem, which is such a beautiful way for us to kind of unpack use cases. Because to your earlier point, there's no way a top-down approach can help us solve integration of AI into the fabric of daily workflows. So the more the teams have a framework to talk about where are the friction points and the barriers and inefficiencies in the way we do our work today, the more the decision makers then have visibility into maybe this process is not needed at all. It doesn't mean that when an intact team goes to, let's say, somebody who's prioritizing and looking at putting resources, whether it's time, energy, or money behind AI integration, at least they have visibility to come back to that team to say, hey, we're not optimizing your current state. Maybe there's a very different way of doing what you're trying to do. Let's look at the outcome that you're trying to achieve versus integrating AI into an existing process to make it inefficient. So it helps the organization at multiple lenses. I love this framework. So do you have an example from an organization that has applied this framework, and what were the typical challenges that they had to navigate? Because I think getting the intact team to work together, this is my perspective, this is what I think, but I might be wrong, is relatively easier than selling the idea beyond your intact team to get buy-in. So how do organizations navigate that if that is a true friction point?
Yeah, so I will point to the food bank example from before, just so folks can kind of continue that thread. It does start with having the governance entity set up multifunctionally and multi-level. I find that though that type of composition lends itself to more of an open-mindedness way of thinking and more openness to innovation and new ideas. And so when the team figured out that intake was a good candidate for a machine to do, many or representatives in that organization, including top leaders, but not only top leaders, people in the middle and distributed throughout, were quite resistant, didn't believe that the citizens that they interact with would want to put private information into a tool, and were very skeptical of the receptivity. Well, the other thing that we learned was that that particular organization only had one Spanish translator, and this person was not always available. They also have a pretty significant Afghani population in that local area who they were not able to serve in their primary language. And I remember they had maybe 3 or 4 other languages that they just didn't have capacity to interact with citizens in their primary language. So what we did is we figured out that we could replicate the chatbot in
Mhm.
multiple languages. So that was a way for us to kind of counteract the either perceived resistance to provide personal information or the real resistance to provide personal information. What we found was the combination of having very open disclosures about how we're treating their information and being able to interact in the private primary language help that team make the case for this change. And it was partially because the governance entity was already set up in more of a flexible function, multi-function, multi-level composition, but that it was also the nature of the appeal was we were able to help them create a well-rounded case for it. And I should also emphasize that the ROI or the return, the time saved, that's fantastic. But that's only part of it. The case has to include what you're going to do with that time saved, right? And in this case, they were able to specify exactly what would be used, how those 16 hours every 2 weeks would be reapplied. And so what other impact could be increased as a result. So those are the pieces of how that particular team, appeal or proposal was able to, go forth. I've been part of other situations where the team proposal hasn't been accepted, but then some version of it over time and not over a lot of time, but like within the next quarter, another version was accepted. So it's also going back to our earlier conversation about having that general experimentation mindset, and then we may try something and it may work or it may not, or, we may find that our hypotheses are faulty in a certain area. So we need to try another angle, and all of that is done in a supportive environment, not in a gotcha, or less than sufficient judgment environment. So those are ways that I've seen it work
That's
well.
fantastic. Another point when you were talking that jumped out to me, which is so important for all of us to keep in mind as we go through this transition, is that typically when we talk about things like, oh, if AI does XYZ for me, it will free up my time to do more strategic work. But who is defining that work? That responsibility also falls on us, right? So we don't have to look out to somebody to come and fill that gap or define that imagination gap of, if I'm doing this today, if I let go of 80% of what I do, instead of fearing it, I should feel empowered to say and present my case to say that, okay, I was spending 80% of my time, which is not a value add to anybody, and machine can do it efficiently. And here is my proposal on, or the team's proposal on, how can we leverage that freed up capacity to do more work where machines either are not ready, because this transition is not like you flip the switch and suddenly we are in the future state. So we'll have to
Exactly.
continuously reinvent ourselves, and we'll have to continuously learn to delegate to AI and take on new pieces of work till the day comes when humans are not required. I don't know when that day is going to come, but it's a
Yeah,
long way out. So we have to go
it's
through.
strange. I mean, Sam Altman from OpenAI was just part of an interview yesterday, I think. The big reveal they had. And one of his statements was that, they're going to be billion-dollar organizations with no human employees. And I don't know. That's up for debate. But back to your point about um, reinvesting the time into higher order, higher value work. Who knows what that is other than you,
Exactly.
right? And who knows, going back to my story about like my father wanting people to have good, fulfilling jobs. It's like, well, each of us knows what that is for us. It's a matter of casting it in the right business case perspective. And I find that dialogue in part 3 as a team reveals not only what individuals can do in their individual role, but then what the team can collectively do in its collective role. And so both at the same time can be harnessed or found or codified or whatever verb you want to use. And that, in my experience, will propel the team's performance as well as individual satisfaction and with their roles and engagement and commitment to the organization and all those great things that we all want to
Yeah,
have.
that's right. It's like the team is working towards finding their purpose and meaning versus us feeling like, somebody has to define it for us. Let's create it for ourselves. And also in this conversation, we talk about integrating AI into our workflows. And, like I see there might be other ways too, but I see right now AI as, like we've been doing automations for a very long time. There will be a continued effort on automations, but there's also augmentation where I'm using AI to help me do my job better or delegate some pieces of work to AI, but the decision is still with me. But then with agents in the mix, we will get into a future state where we delegate certain decisions and choices which are low risk to machines to make as well. So in that sense, yes, the future is where AI in some form becomes a team member. So in that scenario, talk to me about how teams can think about having AI as a team member. What does that future look like with humans and machines making up a team together?
So I like to talk about this in two ways. The first is having the AI team member be part of your workflow. So, like, you know, Michelle does this part, the machine does that part, right? And that's where the handoffs are really important to clarify. So that's one way that it happens, is starting to happen. We will give segments of a workflow, like you mentioned, that are lower risk to an AI team member, and or the tasks have certain characteristics that lend themselves to the machines, like repetitive tasks that have if then logic, things where we can really prescribe parameters, right? Because AI tools are prediction machines, and we have to, as the domain experts involved, must give the tools appropriate context and appropriate instructions and appropriate parameters and ask for specific outputs. So if we can do that for a particular task or bundle of tasks, then we can insert AI as a team member in our workflow. The second way that we can have AI as a team member, and frankly, the way that pretty much any team can do today, is to have AI as a brainstorm team partner. Invite AI, metaphorically, to your meeting. If you are brainstorming a new way of addressing a customer complaint, ask AI for the top 5 suggestions it would have. Give AI your top 2 ideas for what to do and ask it to be your critical thinking partner and break down your ideas and find the faults or weakness areas in your approach and have it involved. So basically include it in your team dialogue when you're trying to solve a problem or when you're trying to brainstorm something. So that use of AI as a team member, we could pretty much do today. Any of us. It depends on obviously what AI tools you have in your corporate or organizational technology ecosystem. That is a very natural use of AI today as a team member. And so I would invite folks to think about, if you're not doing that already today, what are some upcoming tasks or decisions or, again, things that your team needs to brainstorm together? And how could you invite AI to just offer yet another perspective in the team?
So, because the complexity of our, let's say, partnership with AI as a team member might evolve as AI becomes more sophisticated over a period of time. A lot of people say it still hallucinates, and I'm like, thank God it does, because that's why I'm still needed as a human in the mix. Because if it wasn't making wrong judgment calls, then it would have been a faster delegation of work to machines than we see today. But I wonder, this constant experimentation, constant learning of new things, constantly letting go of what we know, which was our expertise, is also hard. So, do teams lean on teams like learning and development and HR in these scenarios? And if they do, what should that partnership look like for intact teams who are on this journey of self transformation, for lack of better terms?
Well, I would actually argue that we shouldn't let go of what we know and should be able to discriminate what unique, scarce knowledge we have because of our experience, because of where we sit in that organization, because of our specific personal past experience in other organizations. We just haven't ever really stopped to think, what is that? What is that special thing that each of us brings? And so if we can just be able to capture that a little bit differently than we have in the past and lean on that and develop it further. You mentioned HR and learning and development. It's really interesting that we're also at an amazing time right now for our ability to serve up learning in the ways that adults learn, which is in little micro bursts with practice and application involved. We can now do that. You can learn a new approach to engage with a customer, and then you can dialogue with AI about that. And you can say, I'm preparing for a customer meeting tomorrow. I want to use this approach. You know, coach me on how this is working. Let's do a little demonstration together and let's practice this together. How did I do? You can engage the AI tool to help you with that. And that's even beyond what our learning and development function can offer based on where the trajectory of where the organization is going and what is strategically important for folks to know about. There might be certain industry trends that are happening that we want to make sure folks in a particular operating unit have a grasp on so that they can use it to influence their work. Well, it's a great opportunity for us to provide that learning, again, in the form that us adults learn and in these ways where we can embed it into our daily work. Learning is no longer a separate activity. We all need to learn all day long. And that's where, again, you loop back to the whole experimentation concept. If experimentation is organizational skill of the future, and we're pushing experimentation in a healthy way into our teams, then we're all learning and experimenting all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have a lot to learn from each other, and we have a lot to learn through our interactions with AI.
Absolutely. That's such a important and amazing point that you bring up, because for the longest time we have been struggling with bringing learning in the flow of work. I'm a big believer of learning by doing, making mistakes, but sometimes the gap was that I don't have feedback mechanism around me to figure out where to course correct or what could have, should have, would I have done differently. And you can't always go to somebody to help you. Nobody's observing you constantly to give you that coaching and feedback in real time. But with machines, we have this opportunity. My next question to you was around, if somebody's put together this pitch or a business case, how do they get leadership sponsorship and buy-in? Now, after this conversation, I'm like, why wouldn't I just put that in Chat GPT and ask it to coach me through pitching and positioning it to my stakeholders as one way, which also is real time learning. It's very practical, it's timely, it's relevant, because I'm going to apply that learning as quickly as I learn in real time in my flow of work, which are all the constraints and issues from our historical L&D initiatives. We just didn't have the right ways of, at scale, in a timely fashion, help upskill, reskill our population. But now we do.
I might have had or have a great mentor who
Mhm.
I'm working with on some established routine, but all of the great mentors tend to be the really busy great mentors because they're great, right? So I don't have access at the level that I might want for what you're talking about, for this practice and rehearsal, which takes time. So if again, this is why it's important. If I educate my AI team member about the particular topic, you know, I'm not going to just let it tell me anything. Like, this is why there's a difference. I think folks hopefully know that are listening and watching that there are some AI tools that are kind of open, right? They go out to the internet to get information. They go anywhere on the
Mhm.
internet to get information and bring it back down, and they put it together and they give you their output. Now, we all know that the quality of information on the internet, but there are other AI tools that are called air gapped models, or models that exist within an envelope is another way to talk about it. Those tools are only trained and only will access the pre-approved knowledge sources that you give it. So if you have a way that that mentor is teaching you to perform a particular function, take a transcript from a meeting that you've had with that mentor and put it inside of that closed thing, right? And have the tool just access that versus going out to the internet and grabbing some other gobbledygook and mixing it in with the proprietary approaches that your organization might use. So that's just something to keep in mind for folks, that there's certain circumstances where those closed tools are really the way to go. It's imperative because you might get really squirrely advice. I don't know that you want to be practicing with a tool that might be telling you some suspect stuff.
Yeah.
But if you can be practicing with a tool that you can rely, it has the pre-approved knowledge sources. You can trust that it's giving you good advice that's in alignment with how your organization operates. Then you can just, be raring to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And both of us are, I think, also kind of highlighting the fact that I'm not saying that let's not have a mentor mentee relationship anymore. What we're saying is that if you have AI in the mix, the controlled AI, whatever your company is giving you access to, and you practice that with AI first, imagine now how that relationship with your mentor is going to be, because you've done the basic steps with the AI, and now your relationship with the mentor is going to go to the next level very quickly because you've shrunk the time of, like
Yes.
not having those quality conversations, because mentors are also kind of strapped for time, like you called out earlier. So, human in the loop always, but let's shrink the gap on where we can actually, do the basic stuff with AI. But now, somebody who was listening to this conversation and is really intrigued and is bought into the 3-step framework that you shared today to help the experimentation momentum going in the teams, what advice would you have for them to pitch this idea of leveraging and using this framework in their team to their teams to get the buy-in that they need to execute or test this idea in their environment?
So Clarity and confidence are really two pieces of the puzzle. Teams do need to translate the experiment into business speak. You need to be clearly showing how this is helping either your individual performance, your team performance, or the performance of your operating unit, whatever you're in. You need to be able to model that out. And so the good news is that by experimenting, we can create these models. We can basically say, if X, then Y, then Z, then we get A. And we can give ranges of predictions with certain levels of certainty or accuracy, right? So think about the undergraduate, research methods class that many of you might have had. Sorry, get back there, but those types of principles are going to be really important in how you articulate your ask, your appeal, your proposal. Show the before after story with metrics that matter. It doesn't take much. It, might take a 2-part slide that says, this is the pre, this is the post, this is what, a type of impact we're looking at. And then, also I encourage people to make proposals as experimentation investments. So let's try this out. Let's pilot this for a defined period of time. Because yes, we've done some experiments as our team, but you all haven't seen that and we don't really know. And if we scale this slightly, it might be a little different. So definitely frame it as more testing, more experimentation, just at a bigger level. And, dialogue with the governance entity about what metrics we want to use to make the decisions about whether this is working well, moderately, or poorly. And then, kind of go from there, because you want to be a responsible innovator. Don't want to just launch completely immediately into full scale implementation. You want to go from your team experiment. You have this 3-part exercise. You might pick something to experiment with, do the before and after, make your appeal, and find something to pilot for a defined period of time to then get more support for it. So that's really the advice I would give to a team putting that together.
That's fantastic. Do we have to think differently if, let's say, I'm an individual contributor and I'm sold onto your framework, and now I want to socialize this framework in my team so that I get their buy-in so that we can start applying that in our regular team cadence? Is there something that people can download from your website, which is a 3-part playbook or something like that to get them started?
So the best thing I would recommend is on my website, you can book a 20-minute brainstorm with me about AI.
Mhm.
And what I would recommend is book that. We'll talk through it. We'll talk through what is going on in your team, what kind of work you're doing. And then I'm happy to, follow up with some customized suggestions, because it's so case by case. It's really hard to just talk about it at this broad level, because and that's part of the magic of this, because
Yeah.
we are making this happen at the team level with the domain experts that know the job very well. And it's just about giving you all tools to be able to bring that out. You all already know the answers. It's just getting the structure and giving a little bit of protected time for your team to run through this exercise. And so that's what I would suggest. I'd love to hear from anybody who's inspired by this conversation. Website is equifinalitysolutions.com. We'll have it somewhere attached to this podcast. But I'm happy to do, a 20-minute free brainstorm with you, whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a team lead, and you might even be an operating group lead thinking, wow, that my teams really could benefit from this. I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Whoever's listening, I will say take up that offer from Michelle and have that 20-minute conversation. It will bring so much clarity to how you need to execute on this journey using a defined framework and a playbook, which is bespoke and customized to your organizational context. Michelle, thank you so much for sharing such a practical and inspiring way for teams to experiment, redesign, and lead change from ground up. I really appreciate your time today.
You're so welcome. It's really my pleasure to be with you. And what a great conversation. Thank you so much.
And for our audience, what did you take away about your own team's readiness to treat AI as a team member and redesign how you work? Check out Michelle's website and book that 20-minute conversation with her. And let's continue the conversation. Share your reflections with me in comments or on our LinkedIn profile. And until next time, keep riding the tide of transformation.